Good evening. I'm Robert Wilson, Cowboy Wisdom Podcast. Tonight's podcast is 7 ways why I rose out of being apprehensive about now. I rose out of being apprehensive about now because the moment I step into presence, every illusion the past ever trained me to fear collapses. The now exposes the fraud of my inherited reflexes and the survival echoes, the ancestor anchored alarms of my museum mind, warnings that were never mine in the now. I stopped bracing the ghost and started perceiving reality. I rise because presence burns the relics before they can speak. I rise because immediacy dissolves the identity that fear needed to survive. I rise because the now activates my sovereign circuitry. Intuition sharpens, perceptions widen, and my nervous system stops asking the past for permission. That's a big thing. Stop asking the past for permission. And to me, that's what change, heal, create, transformation, personal growth, self-improvement all do. You're asking the permission from the past to let go, but when you do it in the now, you're discovering yourself. I rose because the now is the only terrain where I am unborrowed, unstored, and unstoppable. And something about the now, and if you just get quiet, go someplace, look right in front of you. That's the now. What can you see from the past? What do you hear from the past? The past is a museum of the mind. If you can open up to understanding that the past is a museum of the mind, you rise, shine, and energize your life. And that really opens up to a lot of things. And that's something I've expanded into. And I had a lot of stuff. I had a lot of stuff from the past up there. I still do. Why apprehension and apprehensive dissolves being afraid and scared. I rise into the now because apprehension dissolves the moment I see fear for what it is, an inherited reflex, never a present moment truth. Being afraid and being scared were never my emotions, they were echoes from the nervous system that survived before me. As I stand in presence, those echoes lose their authority. The now exposes the illusion that fear belongs to me at all. The moment I breathe into immediacy, the body stops rehearsing old alarms and instantly perceives nowality. Apprehension dissolves because the now gives me clarity instead of caution. Perception instead of protection. Sovereignty instead of survival. I rise because the now unveils I was never fragile, only conditioned. And conditioning can never survive a warrior who finally sees. That's the thing. The now is right here. If you look out until you're thinking, knowing, and all the crap comes in, you're calm. 7 ways why I'm unknowingly apprehensive about now. The now exposes the fraud of your inherited identity. The identity you walk around with wasn't authored by you. It was assembled by parents, teachers, ancestors, and survival reflexes. The now strips that costume off in one breath. Apprehension arises because the ego knows the moment you stand in presence, its entire museum self is unveiled, and as a stitched together illusion. The now demands sovereignty, never survival reflexes. Your nervous system was trained to anticipate danger, never perceive nowality and authenticity. The now requires sovereignty, direct sensing, never inherited scanning. Apprehension and apprehensive is simply the survival mind panicking because the now doesn't need it, feed it, or consult with it. The now ends the mind's dictatorship over your perceptions. The mind survives by controlling the narrative, predicting outcomes, and replaying old stories. The now dethrones the past in the museum instantly. Apprehension is the mind's last attempt to keep you inside its museum, because once you step into presence, that entire authority collapses. Why fear, being afraid, and feeling are inherited nervous system habits. Fear is an ancestral reflex, never a present moment truth. Your nervous system carries the survival codes of generations who lived through danger, scarcity, and unpredictability. The reflexes become your instincts. Fear fires never because the now is unsafe, but because the past trained your body to anticipate threats that no longer exist. You're never scared, you're echoing history. You're never scared, you're echoing history. The nervous system reacts before the awareness can perceive. Fear is often triggered milliseconds before the mind even interprets the moment. The inherited wiring running on autopilot. The body fires old alarms faster than you can sense nowality. And I use nowality because it's here. What feels like being scared is usually the nervous system replaying a loop your ancestors needed, never a truth, never authenticity you require now. Fear is a habit of protection, never a signal of danger. Your nervous system learned to overprotect because survival once depended on it. Fear became a habit, a default setting, a preloaded script. It activates even when the moment is neutral. You're never afraid of the now. You're conditioned to brace for what never arrives. Presence dissolves the habit because perception replaces protection. Why being aware of the now is fresh foresight to the world. Because the now shows me that what memory could never reveal. Memory recycles yesterday's interpretation. Presence unveils what was invisible behind the archive. Awareness of the now feels like fresh foresight because it isn't filtered through survival reflexes. Roles are inherited meanings. It's the first time you're seeing life without a museum glass, because the presence activates perceptions instead of prediction. The past predicts the now perceives what's right here in front of us, based on what occurred. It's based on what is. Awareness is the now gives you clarity that is never borrowed, rehearsed, or inherited from the past. It's raw, immediate, and sovereign audacity here and now. Because the now awakens intuition that was muted by conditioning. Have you ever witnessed that in your life? I have in mine. Indoctrination entrains the mind to obey. Presence trains the intuition to lead and show you a better way. Awareness of now feels fresh because it It connects you to instinct, insight, and inner awareness that conditioning buried. Fresh foresight is simply intuition finally getting oxygen. Fresh foresight is intuition finally receiving oxygen to breathe a bold, better way. Why the quiet of now creates a chaos in the mind, because silence exposes the mind's unchallenged assumptions. The mind survives by narrating, predicting, rehearsing, and replaying. When the now goes quiet, those loops lose their momentum. The mind panics because silence unveils how much of it is activity was inherited. Noise, never truth. Chaos is never danger. It's the collapse of unexamined program. Chaos is never danger. It's the collapse of unexamined programming. First time I ever heard it put that way. Because presence removes the distractions that kept old fears alive. The mind uses noise to avoid seeing its own relics. As the now becomes still, the museum self has nowhere to hide. The chaos you feel is simply the mind confronting the fears, roles, and reflexes it once buried under constant mental chatter. Quiet doesn't create chaos, it unveils it. Because the nervous system mistakes unfamiliar clarity for threat. Your wiring was built for anticipation, never never for perception. The quiet of now feels chaotic because the nervous system never recognizes clarity. It only recognizes patterns. When present interrupts those patterns, the body interrupts the unfamiliar as dangerous. But the chaos is actually the beginning of sovereignty. Why thinking, knowing, knowledge keep the mind moving in noise, because thinking is the mind's addiction to replaying the past. Thinking is the mind's addiction to replaying the past. Where do you see that in your life? I see it in mine all the time. Thinking is never perceptions, it's memory recycling itself. Every thought is an echo of yesterday trying to stay relevant today. The mind generates noise because it can never operate through silence. It needs loops, narratives, and commentary to maintain its authority. Noise is the mind's survival mechanism. Sometimes mind has a hell of a mechanism up there. Because knowing is the ego's need to feel certain, never clear. Knowing is built from inherited conclusions, never lived awareness. The ego clings to knowing to avoid the vulnerability of presence. Certainty creates mental chatter because the mind must constantly defend, justify, and reinforce what it claims. To know claims to know. Noise is the cost of protecting identity. Because knowledge is archived meaning that blocks fresh perception. Knowledge is a museum of old interpretations. Knowledge is a museum of old interpretations. Now that awakened me. When the mind uses knowledge as its lens, it can never see the now. It can only compare, categorize, and interpret. The constant reinforcing creates internal static. Noisy is simply the mind choosing memory over immediacy. When indoctrinated education never quiets down and keeps the past replaying in the mind. Because indoctrination trains the mind to think from memory, never perception. Schooling conditions the mind to analyze, recall, repeat all museum behaviors. This creates a mental engine that never stops reinforcing the past. The mind becomes a narrator of yesterday instead of perceiver of now. So silence feels impossible because knowledge becomes a looping script the mind must constantly defend. Knowledge becomes a looping script the mind must constantly defend. Indoctrinated knowledge isn't alive, it's archived. The mind keeps replaying it because it must protect what it knows. This creates nonstop internal commentary, justification, and comparison. Noise is the ego guarding its museum exhibits. Because indoctrination builds identity that only survives from mental noise. Have you ever witnessed that in your life? I have in mine. The obedient student, the compliant thinker, the character stitched from ancestral expectations, all of it dissolves in presence. So the mind keeps generating noise to keep that identity alive. Quiet would expose the performer, so noise becomes its shield. Why egotistical arrogance is in the mind keeps worry, fear, and unwanted habits circulating. Because egotistical arrogance mistakes mental noise for control. The ego believes thinking equals safety, so it keeps generating commentary, predictions, and worst case rehearsals. This arrogance traps you in loops of worry, fear, because the mind refuses to admit that silence, never noise, is where clarity lives. Because ego certainty protects old wounds instead of dissolving them. Ego arrogance clings to what it knows, even if what it knows is outdated pain. It keeps replaying the same because ego depends on the familiar patterns to survive. Unwanted habits circulate because the ego needs them to stay relevant. Fear, worry, and reactive loops give the ego something to manage, fix, or narrate. When you rise of presence, the patterns lose oxygen. Yet the ego fights to keep them alive because without them, the ego has no role and it feels unwanted. Why inherited nervous system programming created my mind invented thinking, knowing, and thoughts. Because my nervous system learned to think before I learned to perceive. Inherited wiring fires first, awareness second. Your ancestors survived by reacting, predicting, anticipating danger. The survival reflex became your thinking. What feels like your thoughts is often ancient programming replaying itself through your mind. Because your inherited reflex loops become the architecture of my knowing. Knowing is never clarity, it's memory dressed as truth. Your nervous system stored your ancestors' fears, interpretations, and warning, then fed them into your mind as knowledge. The museum mind is never wisdom, it's archived survival logic pretending to be insight. Because the museum mind invents thoughts to keep old programming alive. The mind generates commentary, stories, and explanations to justify the nervous system's inherited reactions. Where do you feel and witness that in yourself? I witness that. That's your inner dialogue a lot of times. Everybody says you want to get a positive dialogue. Well, you can never get a positive dialogue till you understand where the dialogue begins and what it's really trying to control. You want to open up to an inspirational flow, and then you can dissolve all that other stuff. Thoughts become the museum tour guide. narrating relics as if with their reality. Thinking is not you, it's the programming trying to stay relevant. The highest frequency difference between design and architecture. This is one I played with today. I just kind of wanted to understand that. This is not a textbook one. Design is a creative expression. Architecture is structural intelligence. Design plays with possibilities, aesthetics, and choices. Architecture governs the underlying logic, load-bearing truth, the invisible framework that makes the designs possible. Design is the color, architect is the skeleton. Design crafts the experience, architecture shapes the existence. Design influences how something feels, flows, and is interacted with. Architecture determines how it stands, functions, and survives. Design is perception, architecture is foundation. Design can be changed, architecture must be understood. You can redesign endlessly, but architecture is wrong, nothing works. Design is an architecture adventure, and architecture is a destiny. Why design is architectural adventures? Because design is the imagination leaving the map. Design is never decoration. It's the moment the imagination refuses the known world and design fresh, pristine scenery in your inner landscape. It's the artistic adventure because it demands rise beyond inherited patterns, create from instinct, intuition, and raw perception. Design is where the mind stops repeating and instantly illuminates the discovery of you. Because design turns perception into play, never performance. Artistic adventure begins the instant you stop designing to impress others and instantly designing to explore. Design becomes a frontier, a place where you test edges, break forms, and allow curiosity to lead and color your life with your desires. It's not about correctness, it's about the thrill of seeing what has never existed until you made it authentic. Because design is the soul of experimenting with form. Architecture holds the structure, but design is a wild spirit shaping the experience. It's architecture adventure because it lets intuition sculpt, inspiration guide, imagination roam. Design is where the inner world becomes visible, a journey of expression, never exploitation. Why now is innocent. Inspiration initiates my inventive intuition, energizing colorful imagination, coloring the images of my dreamers' paradises. The now carries zero past, zero residue, zero inherited fingerprint. Its innocence awakens inspiration that is never recycled or conditioned. In the freshness, your intuition rises, unburdened, inventive, and wild, free to generate fresh pathways instead of repeating old ones. As presence activates intuition as a living current, never a learned skill, intuition never comes from thinking, it comes from immediacy. When you stand in the now, your inner circuitry lights up with raw perception. This energizes your imagination, giving it voltage, color, and a movement. The now becomes the spark that animates your inner worlds. Because the now paints imagination with colors the past could never invent. The now paints imagination with colors the past and designs the past could never invent. Dreamers' paradises are never built from memory. They're born from presence. The now gives your imagination fresh pigments, fresh textures, fresh dimensions. It's your inner artistic color, authenticity that the museum mind could never conceive. In the now, imagination becomes a living canvas. Why the now is my liberator of me, sets me free, illuminating my sovereign spirit of freedom. Because the now dissolves every identity the past forced me to perform. The now strips away the museum self, the roles, the reflexes, inherited personas that kept you obedient to memory. In presence, those characters lose oxygen. You become unbound and unborrowed, unperformed. This is liberation the moment you stop being who the past invented and start being who you actually are. Because the now returns me to the sovereignty that thinking once hijacked. Thinking, knowing, knowledge kept you trapped in loops of fear, worry, and inherited logic. The now interrupts that machinery. It frees your spirit from mental noise and restores your natural authority. The inner command that doesn't need permission, validation, or past-based certainty, because the now activates the spirit that can never be controlled, conditioned, or contained. Your sovereign spirit doesn't live in memory. It lives in the here and now. The now awakens that raw, ungoverned essence. It liberates your intuition, your clarity, and your inner power. In the presence, you stop surviving and instantly begin expressing. You stop repeating and start originating. You stop obeying and start embodying the freedom. Why now is now. Because the now is the only moment never constructed by memory. The past is replay. The future is projection. The now is unmanufactured bliss. It's never stitched from thought, fear, inherited programming. The now is now because it stands outside the museum's mind's architecture. It is the only moment that exists without interpretation. Because the now is the only place where perception is alive well for you to raise hell. Thinking is old, knowing is old, knowledge is old, yet perception happens only in immediacy. And the now is now because it's the living field where intuition, clarity, and awareness ignite. Everything else is an echo. Presence is the only moment with a pulse. Because the now is self-existing, needing zero story, zero meaning, and zero past. The now doesn't wait for permission from thought. It never requires identity, narrative, or explanation. It simply is. The self-existence makes it its pure. The sovereign existence makes it the purest form of nowality, untouched, unfiltered, and unborrowed. The now is now because it can never be delayed, defined, or domesticated in any way. Because now is all there is. It's right here. But if you really give yourself opportunity and deal, and just look at it right here. You look straight out and try to quiet the mind. It takes some, but there's nothing there. It's just quiet. But it's allowing you to flow with whatever. And I want to thank you for listening. I'm Robert A. Wilson with Cowboy Wisdom Podcast. And may your life be a blessing to me. Your life is a blessing to me and the world. Thank you and good night.